She bought a dream, a new beginning, a quiet solitude by the sea, after years of empty chairs and unspoken words. Then a knock, a familiar shadow on her porch, 2 faces from a past she'd buried. Suddenly, her peace was shattered, the silence broken. Could a beach house mend a broken family, or would it just expose deeper wounds? Years of silence, a lifetime of regret. Some doors, once closed, can never truly be reopened. Or can they? Alara stepped onto the sun-warmed deck of her new beach house, the salty air a balm to her soul. She took a deep breath, the vast expanse of the ocean mirroring the quiet solitude she'd embraced for so long. For years, every Mother's Day had been a stark reminder of what she'd lost, a silent testament to the void in her life. This year, she promised herself, would be different. This house, with its weathered wood and ocean views, was her sanctuary, her fresh start. She imagined quiet mornings with coffee, evenings watching sunsets paint the sky, a life unburdened by past expectations. Unpacking a box of old photographs, she paused, her gaze lingering on a faded image of 2 smiling children. A bittersweet ache settled in her chest, a familiar companion. New beginnings, she whispered to the sea, a silent prayer. She carefully placed the photos back, determined to focus on the present. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore was the only sound, a peaceful melody. A sharp rap on the front door shattered the evening's tranquility. Alara, startled, straightened her. Who could it be? As she pulled the door open, her breath caught in her throat. Standing on her porch, silhouetted against the fading light, were 2 figures that instantly transported her back decades. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Ronan and Lyra. They stood there, hesitant, almost strangers, yet achingly familiar. A long, awkward silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken years. "Mother," Ronan finally managed, his voice deeper than she remembered, laced with a tremor. Lyra offered a small, hopeful smile. Alara could only stare, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. The air inside the living room was thick with a tension that hummed like an untuned string. Alara had gestured them in, but the initial shock had given way to a guarded stiffness. Ronan stood by the large window, his gaze fixed on the ocean, offering only terse one-word answers. Lyra, ever the more outwardly emotional, perched on the edge of a wicker chair, fidgeting with her hands, trying to bridge the chasm. "It's a beautiful place, Mother," Lyra offered, her voice soft, attempting to fill the silence. Alara nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What brings you both here?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Ronan turned slowly, "We heard you bought it," Ronan stated, his tone flat, devoid of any real warmth. "A whole new life, without a word to us." The accusation hung heavy in the air, a barb aimed directly at her. Alara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I didn't think it mattered," she retorted, the old wounds beginning to ache. "You both made it clear you had lives of your own, far away from mine." Lyra gasped softly, placing a hand on Ronan's arm. "That's not fair, Mother. We tried to reach out." Ronan pulled away from his sister's touch. "Tried to reach out? You think a few missed calls make up for years of silence? For every mother's day spent wondering if you even remembered we existed?" His voice rose, raw with years of pent-up anger. Alara recoiled, feeling the familiar sting of his words. "How dare you?" she began. But Ronan cut her off, stepping closer, his face etched with pain. "How dare you, Alara? You left us." Alara flinched as Ronan's words pierced the fragile silence. "I left you? I raised you, Ronan. I gave you everything I had." Her voice cracked, betraying the practiced calm she usually maintained. Lyra stepped between them, her face pale. "Please stop." "This isn't helping." Ronan's jaw was clenched, He took a step back, but the accusation still hung in the air, a physical weight. Alara felt a tremor run through her, not just from anger, but from a profound hurt. She looked from Ronan's hardened face to Lyra's pleading. The ocean outside, usually a source of peace, now seemed to mock her with its endless, indifferent roar. She turned away, needing a moment to compose herself, her back to them. The air was thick with the weight of decades of unspoken pain. The evening descended into a strained silence. Alara, despite her turmoil, felt the ingrained need to offer hospitality. She prepared a simple meal, the clinking of plates the only sound in the vast kitchen. Ronan sat at the dining table, picking at his food, while Lyra attempted polite conversation, mostly directed at her mother. "This is nice, Mother," Lyra said, gesturing vaguely at the house. Alara offered a tight smile. "It's home now." Ronan remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the plate as if it held all the answers to their fractured past. Alara watched him, a knot of old anxieties tightening in her stomach. She wondered what they truly wanted, beyond this unexpected, jarring visit. Was it reconciliation, or merely an unearthing of old grievances? The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth, a profound weariness settling over her. Later, as Ronan retreated to one of the guest rooms, Lyra found Alara on the deck, staring out at the moonlit ocean. "Mother," she began softly, her voice hesitant. Alara turned, her expression softening slightly at her daughter's presence. "He's just so angry, isn't he?" Lyra sighed, joining her by the railing. "He's always been protective. After Dad left, and then, you just seemed to disappear into yourself. We didn't understand. We were kids." Alara closed her. "I was trying to survive, Lyra. I thought I was protecting you both by not burdening you with my own pain." Lyra placed a hand gently on her arm. "We just wanted to know you were okay, that you still cared." The raw honesty in Lyra's voice chipped away at Alara's defenses, revealing the profound misunderstanding that had festered for years. A single tear traced a path down Alara's cheek. The next morning, a fragile quiet had settled over the house. Alara was in the living room, tidying a bookshelf, when a small, leather-bound journal slipped from between two books. It was her old diary, filled with entries from years ago, especially around the time her husband had left. As she opened it, a faded photograph fell out, landing face up on the polished floor. It was a picture of a younger Alara, Ronan, and Lyra, laughing on a beach, taken just before everything fell apart. At that exact moment, Ronan entered the room, drawn by the sound. A dangerous glint entered his gaze. "What's that?" he demanded, his voice sharp, instantly shattering the morning's peace. Alara quickly tried to cover the journal, her heart pounding. Too late. Ronan's gaze hardened, falling instantly on the old leather-bound journal and the faded photograph. The image, a snapshot of their family in happier times, seemed to mock the present tension. Alara instinctively tried to shield the items, a wave of panic washing over her. But it was too late. His accusation, sharp and cold, cut through the quiet morning air, demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. Lyra, drawn by the sudden shift in atmosphere, entered the room, her expression a mix of concern and trepidation. She took in the scene. Her mother's defensive posture, Ronan's simmering anger, and the innocent relic of their past on the floor. The air crackled with unspoken history, each breath a tightrope walk over years of resentment. Alara felt a familiar ache in her chest, a deep-seated fear of confronting the very memories she had tried to bury. She knew this moment was inevitable, yet dreaded its arrival. Ronan, fueled by a surge of old resentments, moved swiftly, snatching the journal from the floor before Alara could fully cover it. His fingers, trembling slightly, flipped through the brittle pages until an entry caught his eye, specifically detailing the immediate aftermath of his father's departure. He began to read aloud, his voice laced with a bitter edge, twisting Alara's raw words of grief and confusion into an indictment of her perceived abandonment. Lyra rushed forward, her hands outstretched in a futile attempt to de-escalate the situation, pleading with her brother to stop. But Ronan was beyond reason, lost in the pain of his childhood interpretation, convinced the words confirmed his deepest fears about his mother's priorities. Alara watched, helpless, as her most vulnerable thoughts were weaponized against her, her heart aching with a pain that felt as fresh as it did decades ago. The moment was a brutal excavation of a wound that had never truly healed. The confrontation reached its peak as Ronan, unable to bear another moment in the house, abruptly slammed the journal shut and stormed out, the front door echoing his fury. The silence he left behind was deafening, a heavy blanket of unspoken pain settling over Alara and Lyra. Alara sank onto a nearby sofa, her shoulders slumping, the fight having drained every ounce of her strength. Lyra immediately went to her, placing a comforting hand on her mother's arm, her presence a much-needed anchor. Alara's voice, when it came, was a fragile whisper, a confession of her own struggles and the overwhelming grief she had felt after their father left. She explained how she had believed, in her broken state, that distancing herself was a way to protect her children from her own despair, a misguided attempt to shield them from a pain she couldn't articulate. The raw honesty in her voice was a testament to the years of silent suffering she had endured, a truth Lyra had never fully understood until now. Ronan walked furiously along the shore, the relentless crash of waves mirroring the turmoil in his heart. Each step was an attempt to outrun the ghost of his past, the bitter words from the journal echoing in his mind. He kicked at a piece of driftwood, remembering summer days on this very beach, fragments of a forgotten childhood before everything shattered. His foot struck something solid and he looked down, seeing a small weathered wooden box half buried in the sand. Curiosity overriding his anger, he bent down, his fingers brushing away the damp grains. It was an old memory box, crudely carved with the initials R and L, a childhood project Alara had made for them. He lifted the lid, a jolt going through him as he saw a faded, hand-drawn map tucked inside, its edges softened by time and the elements. The map depicted a treasure hunt, leading to a hidden gem somewhere along this very coastline. Ronan carefully studied the faded, hand-drawn map, his initial anger at Alara momentarily forgotten, replaced by a surprising flicker of childhood nostalgia. The crudely drawn lines and symbols, depicting their old beach and a cryptic X, promised a hidden gem, a relic from a time when their family felt whole and unbreakable. He remembered Alara's infectious enthusiasm for their beach adventures, her playful secrets and elaborate setups for their games. A profound pang of conflicting emotions hit him, the warmth of a long-buried, forgotten memory battling fiercely against the bitter resentment he still carried in his heart. He traced the familiar shoreline depicted, recognizing landmarks from their past, places where they had laughed freely. Could this simple, innocent piece of paper really be what he thought it was? A tangible link to a pure, uncorrupted part of his childhood, untainted by the pain that followed. He clutched the weathered wooden box and map tightly, a strange sense of anticipation mingling with his uncertainty as he slowly made his way back towards the quiet beach house. He found himself wondering if the gem was a real object or a symbolic one, a question that pulled him forward. What would Alara say if she saw this? He imagined her reaction, a rare moment of connection that felt both terrifying and deeply appealing. This unexpected discovery felt like a fragile thread from a life he thought was completely severed. The ocean breeze, usually a source of irritation, now felt like a gentle whisper guiding him. Lyra, having wandered through the quiet house in search of her brother, finally found Ronan in the living room, completely engrossed in the old map spread meticulously across the rustic coffee table. The treasure map, she exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and genuine excitement, instantly bridging the gap between them. Oh my goodness, I remember this so vividly. We spent weeks looking for it, didn't we? We never actually found the gem, though. Ronan looked up slowly, his expression still a complex mix of guardedness and burgeoning vulnerability, grappling with the sudden flood of poignant memories. She made it for us, he stated, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, devoid of its usual sharp edge. Lyra knelt eagerly beside him, her fingers gently tracing a familiar squiggly line on the aged paper. We spent days trying to follow the clues, digging in all the wrong spots. It was so much fun, wasn't it? For a precious, fleeting moment, the palpable tension that usually permeated their interactions was completely replaced by a shared, albeit bittersweet memory of a happier time. The map was a tangible, fragile link to a past that felt both distant and incredibly close, a delicate bridge between their present estrangement and a hopeful future. Alara entered the living room, drawn by the unexpected sound of Lyra's excited voice. and stopped abruptly at the sight of her children huddled closely over the old, faded map. Her gaze fell upon the familiar, crudely drawn lines, and a soft, wistful smile, tinged with a hint of melancholy, gently touched her lips. "The treasure map," she murmured, a distant, cherished memory surfacing effortlessly from the depths of her mind. "I made that for you too, all those summers ago. We never did find the gem, did we? I always meant to take you back." Ronan stiffened almost imperceptibly at her voice, but Lyra looked up at Alara, a hopeful, inviting glint sparkling in her. "We were just talking about it, Mother. All those wonderful summers we spent on the beach, searching for pirates." Alara walked closer, her oceans washing over her. "I remember how incredibly excited you both were. You used to spend hours digging, convinced you were on the verge of a magnificent discovery. The shared memory, for a brief but potent moment, visibly softened the sharp edges of their strained relationship, hinting at the possibility of a different, more connected future. She felt a cautious, tentative hope begin to bloom gently in her chest, a fragile flower in barren land. It was a memory not tainted by the pain, a pure moment of family. "Maybe we should try to find it now," Lyra suggested, her voice filled with a surprising, almost childlike enthusiasm that hadn't been present in her demeanor for years. Ronan hesitated for a long moment, then a flicker of agreement, a rare softening, crossed his usually stoic face, betraying a hint of his own dormant curiosity. Alara looked from one to the other, a familiar pang of longing mixing powerfully with her lingering apprehension about revisiting the past. Could this simple, innocent map truly bridge the vast, silent gap that had grown between them over decades? "It's been decades since we last looked," Alara said softly, a gentle warning underlying her tone. "Things change on the beach, the landscape shifts with the tides." Despite her words of caution, there was an unmistakable spark of adventure, a glimmer of hope in her. Ronan, without another word, picked up the map, a newfound determination visibly squaring his shoulders and straightening his posture. "Let's go," he declared, his voice firm, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips as he met Lyra's eager gaze. The three of them stepped out onto the sun-drenched beach, following the faded lines of the map, the invigorating salty air bracing them against the unknown. As they walked further along the familiar coastline, the path became increasingly less clear, leading them towards a secluded, rocky cove they hadn't visited in years, a place almost forgotten. Suddenly Ronan stopped dead in his tracks, his riotous opening that seemed to beckon them. "Look," he whispered, a tremor of awe and trepidation in his voice, his finger pointing directly. "The X is right there, at the mouth of that cave." The mouth of the secluded cove's cave loomed before them, a dark, damp maw that seemed to exhale the scent of ancient earth and salt. Ronan, holding the faded map, hesitated only a moment before stepping towards the shadowy entrance, his determination overriding any lingering trepidation. Lyra followed closely, a mixture of childhood excitement and adult curiosity lighting her face, her hand instinctively reaching for Ronan's arm. Alara, however, paused at the threshold, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach as she stared into the unknown darkness. This place held not just a childhood game, but potentially a confrontation with long-buried truths she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The gentle lapping of waves outside felt distant, replaced by the echoing drip of water deep within the cave. They switched on their phone flashlights, the narrow beams piercing the gloom, revealing glistening, moss-covered rock formations. Ronan took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping the immediate entrance, searching for any further clues. Lyra squeezed his arm, a silent encouragement. Alara finally stepped inside, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against her ribs. Inside the cave, the air was surprisingly cool and still, a stark contrast to the breezy beach outside. Their flashlights danced across the rough, wet walls, revealing fascinating geological patterns and the occasional glint of water. They moved slowly, Ronan leading the way, Lyra, with a growing sense of wonder, pointed to a small, almost imperceptible carving on a smooth rock face. It was a crude drawing of a stick figure family, holding hands, almost faded into the stone itself. "Look," she whispered, her voice echoing softly. "I remember this. We drew it when we were kids, pretending this was our secret hideout." Ronan stopped, his gaze fixed on the simple drawing, a rare, soft smile gracing his lips. A memory, tender and unburdened, briefly washed over him, temporarily displacing the years of hurt. Ilara stepped closer, her fingers gently tracing the outline of the stick figures, a bittersweet warmth spreading through her chest. It was a tiny, fragile anchor to a happier past, a reminder of the innocent joy they once shared. Following the faded clues on the map, which seemed to reference specific rock formations, Ronan guided them deeper into a narrow, winding passage. The air grew heavier, and the sound of the ocean became a distant murmur. Suddenly, the passage opened into a slightly larger cavern. In the far corner, almost perfectly camouflaged by a cluster of jagged rocks, Ronan noticed an anomaly. A small, meticulously carved wooden panel, almost flush with the cave wall. His heart quickened. "Here," he stated, his voice hushed with anticipation, pointing towards it. Lyra gasped, her excitement palpable. They approached the panel, its surface weathered but clearly man-made. Ronan knelt, carefully examining the edges, his fingers tracing the faint outline of a hidden latch. With a gentle push and a soft click, the panel swung inwards, revealing a shallow, dark recess. All three leaned in, their flashlight beams converging on the shadowy opening, their breaths held in unison. A profound sense of imminent discovery hung heavy in the damp air. Inside the recess, nestled securely against the damp rock, was not a glittering gem, but a small, worn canvas satchel, surprisingly intact despite the years. Ronan reached in, his fingers brushing against the aged fabric, and carefully pulled it out. As he unfastened the drawstring, a faint scent of old paper and salt filled the air. He tipped the satchel, and a stack of faded, handwritten envelopes tumbled out onto the cave floor. Each one bore a familiar, elegant script, and a date that corresponded to a Mother's Day from their estranged years. "They're letters," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Ronan picked up the top envelope, his hands trembling slightly, seeing his name meticulously written. Ilara stared at the letters, her own words from a past filled with pain and longing, now unearthed. A profound tremor ran through her, and tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down her cheeks as decades of unexpressed grief and love surfaced. Ronan slowly opened the first letter, his gaze fixed on his mother's handwriting, the words poised to reveal a truth they had never known. The weight of years of silence hung heavy, about to be broken by her deepest confessions. Ronan's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the first letter, its brittle paper rustling in the cavern's quiet. His never imagined. It wasn't an indictment, but a raw, vulnerable confession of a mother's overwhelming grief and fear after their father's departure. Ilara wrote about sleepless nights, the crushing weight of responsibility, and the misguided belief that her own pain would contaminate their childhoods. She spoke of watching them from afar, aching to reach out but paralyzed by shame and the fear of failing them further. Lyra leaned in, her gaze fixed on her brother's face, sensing the shift in his demeanor. A single tear escaped Ronan's eye, tracing a path through the dust on his cheek, as the decades of his anger began to crumble under the weight of his mother's hidden anguish. The profound silence of the cave was broken only by the soft drips of water and the quiet turning of the pages, each word a revelation. As Ronan finished the first letter, he slowly passed it to Lyra, who read it with increasing empathy, her own. Ilara, her voice thick with emotion, began to explain further, her words echoing the sentiments in the letters. She described the deep loneliness she felt, how every Mother's Day, despite her attempts at self-preservation, was a silent torment, a longing for her children she thought she had lost forever. She confessed that buying the beach house was an attempt to rebuild, to find a place of peace where she could finally mourn and heal, never truly expecting them to return. The cave, once a symbol of their shared innocent past, now became a sanctuary for these raw, overdue truths. Ronan, no longer defensive, found himself listening intently, seeing his mother not as a villain, but as a deeply flawed, heartbroken woman who had struggled in her own way. The weight of years of misunderstanding began to lift, replaced by a fragile, new understanding after what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only minutes. The last letter was read, its final words hanging in the air like a fragile promise. A profound silence descended upon the cavern, different from the earlier tension. This was a silence of shared grief and burgeoning understanding. Ronan finally met Alara's gaze, his, I didn't know, mother," he whispered, the raw honesty in his voice shattering years of resentment. "I always thought, you just didn't care." Ilara reached out, her hand trembling as she gently cupped Ronan's face. "I always cared, my son. More than you could ever know. I just didn't know how to show you anymore. How to be the mother you needed when I was so broken." Lyra moved closer, wrapping an arm around Ilara, then reaching for Ronan's hand. 3 hands met. A silent acknowledgement of their shared pain and the difficult path towards healing. The hidden gem wasn't a material object. It was this unearthed truth, this fragile, rediscovered connection. Emerging from the cave, the bright sunlight felt almost blinding, a stark contrast to the intimate darkness they had just left. The ocean breeze, once a symbol of Alara's solitude, now felt like a refreshing embrace, carrying away the last vestiges of their past resentments. They walked back along the beach, not in silence, but with a quiet understanding, a new rhythm to their steps. Ronan, for the first time in years, looped his arm casually through Alara's, a gesture of affection that spoke volumes. Lyra walked beside them, a genuine radiant smile on her face, her hand occasionally brushing her mother's. The beach house, no longer just Alara's sanctuary, felt like it was finally becoming a shared home, a place where new memories could be forged, built on a foundation of honesty and forgiveness. As they reached the steps, Alara looked out at the vast, shimmering ocean. "It's a new beginning," she murmured, not as a silent prayer to herself, but a quiet, hopeful declaration shared with her children, who stood beside her. Finally home. Thanks for watching After Decades Alone. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next drama.